I'm going to talk today a little bit about sun mysteries, which is really quite a large field, really, because the sun is really quite an important focus for us. So we'll try and approach it a little bit out of what mainstream science is saying about the sun, but we'll also try and approach it a little bit about what esoteric or more spiritual aspects of the sun is, how it's been seen over through different cultures, and then try and relate that a little bit to how we can relate to the sun and the mysteries of the sun, why it's so important for us to find a relationship to the sun in the context of a modern spirituality in the 21st century. Is that not rather pagan, or is it, what's this thing, the sun, that we want to talk about? And I'll be coming at it hopefully from a number of directions, mainly out of the teachings of Guru China. We will be using that quite a lot. But where does this come, and why have we dug into places where we feel that approaching the sun and channeling the sun energy is that important to us? So the mysteries part of it, the mysteries have always given us the ability to die so that we can know that the soul can live independently of the body. I'll say that again. The mysteries teach us how to die so that we can experience that the soul can live independently of the body. Yeah, that's what a mystery center is. That's what a mystery center tries to do. And there are, of course, many kinds of mystery centers. Ancient Egyptian mystery centers, Celtic mystery centers, Christian mystery centers. You could even say this chapel that we're standing in is a Christian mystery center where we learn to die so that we can experience how the soul lives independently of the body. Someone like some great sages have sayings like, if you don't learn how to die before you die, you won't die properly when you die. And every day we are met with the forces of death. Every day, part of life. In fact, one certain thing in life is that we have to die. It is inevitable. But we tend to push it out in front of us to the big death. Whereas the mysteries want us to engage constructively with death every day. So every day we meet small deaths. And how we deal with that helps us to learn that there's something beyond birth. That might be a bit cryptic, but I think if we look in our lives, we all at least can relate to the fact that suffering is part of our daily life. And it's very countercultural at the moment, especially in the West, to embrace suffering. If we don't medicalize suffering, we stand as seen as a kind of a crazy fringe to say it's okay not to medicalize our suffering, whether it be soul suffering or physical suffering. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't medicalize some of our suffering, but it shouldn't be the first option. Some suffering does need medicalization. All suffering needs some sense of therapeutic process with it, but it doesn't have to numb the pain. Because if we numb the pain of our process, we are not really dipping into the mystery of what it means to be a human being. And this is, in many ways, what the great sun mystery teaches us, this great being of the sun. So where does the sun come from? Where does our solar system come from? And before we start, to start with, I'd like to ask you to consider a question. What do you believe is true even though you can't prove it? What do you believe is true even though you can't prove it? Now, there's a group of people called The Edge. You can look them up. And every year they gather about 300 leading scientists and thinkers around the world and ask them a question. And this was the question in 2005 of The Edge. And someone like Richard Dawkins answered, I believe that evolution precedes consciousness, but I can't prove it. So he's a religious man, Richard Dawkins, and he's quite a fanatical religious man in this belief that evolution precedes consciousness, which is, in a way, has driven a lot of our scientific and our reasonable approach to understanding how the world works. But is that what you believe? That evolution precedes consciousness? So another person, he wasn't at the conference I don't think, but Peter Russell is a wonderful scientist, and I suppose to get the gravity of some of these comments, there was a young group of people at Oxford University. Their names were Richard Dawkins, Rupert Sheldrake, Alistair McGrath and Peter Russell. They all studied together. They studied science together and then went in slightly different paths. So Richard Dawkins stayed with physics and wrote The God Delusion, as we know. Alistair McGrath, who had turned to biology, he also then turned to theology and he worked in Edinburgh. I think he's back in Oxford now, and he's got a YouTube channel which is worth watching. He wrote a book called The Dawkins Delusion. And his other friend, Rupert Sheldrake, who turned a bit more to the theosophical path and worked on his theory of morphic resonance as being the cause of evolution, right? The Science Delusion. And these three books are actually really worth reading in conjunction with each other, because Alistair McGrath challenges Richard Dawkins to say your God of the Gaps theology was current in about the 17th century. And if you want to really talk about current theological premises, please don't talk about God of the Gaps, because that doesn't exist in theology anymore. And Rupert Sheldrake wrote about the 10 delusions of natural science. And it more or less goes down the path of saying there are certain assumptions, certain pretexts that natural science or mechanistic science work with that are wrong. They're basically wrong. They've been proven incorrect, and yet the mass media presentation of evolutionary theory rides on these incorrect assumptions, both philosophically and theologically, and according to scientific law. So when we look at that, Peter Russell then turns around and says, I think we've been asking the wrong question in science, because the question we've been asking is, how does consciousness arise from matter? Evolution theory. Stars order themselves, stardust, Big Bang, nebulae, starts ordering itself, matter happens, and then life happens. No one knows how, but then out of life suddenly consciousness arises. How does consciousness arise from matter? And he said, that's the wrong question. We need to ask ourselves, how does matter arise from consciousness? How does matter arise from consciousness? And so quantum, I don't want to go into a whole lot of sort of quantum physics and things, but the whole basis of physics and the exploration of the material world really is starting to move into what we call Noetic Science. So Noetic Science means the science of consciousness, nous being what we think. So how does consciousness affect matter? One of the great novelists, popular novelist, Dan Brown, wrote a book, a better book than the Da Vinci Code. There's a better one than the Da Vinci Code, which is called The Lost Symbol. And the lost symbol is really fantastic because it goes into all sorts of esoteric things. And the lost symbol really is the lost word. That we can't actually speak the word symbolized in the Bible, in the book. However, it works with people who are working with Noetic Science. And this whole idea that there are experiments, for example, do you know how much your soul weighs? They've worked out that your soul weighs about 0.27 of a gram.
Is that less than a feather?
Yeah, it's less than a feather.
Wasn't this one of Shylock's questions?
Sorry?
One of the Shakespeare?
Yeah.
Were they weighing the soul? No, they were weighing...
What is the weight of a man's soul? Anyway, what they've done is they set up these experiments where they're trying to measure the effect of consciousness. So they isolate a person who's dying in a vacuum, and then when the person dies, they get lighter by 0.27 grams.
Wow.
And so the soul, there's actually something that leaves the body when you die.
So is this
measurable.
Noetic Science? What is Noetic Science?
Noetic meaning nous, consciousness. So it comes from nous, the Greek word for thinking, noetic. So they're trying to measure, and quantum physics works with that idea, that it used to be called the observer effect, that the observer changes the outcome. This is actually making massive inroads in the world. So we've worked here before in this community with deciding to stay here in this building. We've worked with Hoshama's work, where in organizational learning, he pushes very strongly that intention is not enough. But how you attend to a process changes the outcome. So if I actually sit with you and listen to you speaking, that changes the outcome of the conversation than if I'm busy on my phone the whole time. So how I attend to social processes changes the outcome. And the whole idea of quantum physics is that, and then, it goes down then into parallel universes, string theory. I'm not sure if we want to go down into all of that sort of area, but it is very interesting to know that how I attend to an experiment, it changes it. A very simple thing. I mean, teachers might know this. Chemistry at school, you set up an experiment, and some children make it work and some don't. I remember that myself with the chemistry experiment at school. It didn't work, and all my other friends had worked. Why? I did exactly the same thing, but mine didn't work. Because of quantum physics, we say because of how I did it. It didn't work. So the chemical formula, the physics of it is not the only important thing in the material world. It's the consciousness with which we add to it that changes the outcome. Now, when we go to Rudolf Steiner, he works with this very clearly. He obviously was, at a time, he was engaging with all the new appearing evolution theory, Haeckel, all the people who at the time, Darwin. And there was obviously a bit of a theory after the time, you are what you eat. You are what you eat. And he said, no, that's not true. You are what you think. What you eat goes into your body. Yes, there's a part reality to that. But what you think is what you are when you die. So when you die, what you have thought about the nature of the human being, what your philosophies are about the nature of the human being, about the world, about evolution, is what goes with you, not what you ate. I'm not saying we shouldn't eat healthily, don't get me wrong. Yeah, don't get me wrong. But you are what you think. Now that might be something for you to chew upon. But we need to work very strongly with this idea that a critical part of being human on the earth is to know what we think and what we feel and what we do is very important. So in the funeral service of the act of consecration of man, or in the Rosicrucian teachings, we hear things. Think, O human being, that you are beholden for everything that you think, say, and do. So when we die, what we thought, what we've said, what we feel, is as real as what we've done in the physical world. So if we've been angry with someone, or the outcomes of these things become part of the reality that we experience ourselves in when we die. Sure, having a healthy physical body is part of being able to hold good thoughts. I'm not saying they're disconnected. But we can't just attend to the physics anymore. So when we're looking at the science of understanding things, the physics of it, the physical, materialistic, measurable science is really only a small part of the equation. So when we look at that and we start to say the sun comes from somewhere, if we look at evolution theory, fortunately they've got to the point where they realize that there was something before the Big Bang. So there's no longer Big Bang is the first part of the evolution of our solar system. And that's because of observation. So scientific observation has brought us to know that Big Bang wasn't the beginning of evolution, which is great because it wasn't. We've been around a lot longer. So science leads us to measure and observe things that we used to know. It puts it in a new metaphor, a new language, which is quite important to do. So when we look at the current understanding of the birth of the sun, it comes from a sacrifice, actually. A star sacrifices itself. It's called a supernova. A star dies and it blows up. And in what then is known as stardust, there's a ripple effect. And that ripple effect of an explosion of a star, there's about 400 million of these a day in the universe, so it's not uncommon. Yeah, there are supernovas, because the universe is a pretty big space. So this is happening all the time, that there are these giving up of life of a star, which then ripple effects into the stardust and starts to order it and flattens it out and densifies. So there's a whole entropy within the stardust. And then a certain Big Bang does happen. But there's a process that happens before a Big Bang. This is what they're starting to realize. And that then starts to order the stardust in a particular way. It takes a long time before a sun or a star can be actually ordered. About a few million years before that happens. And not all of those stars that are born each day make it to this stable phase. Yeah, so a lot of processes go on, but it doesn't actually make it through. We could almost call it an embryonic phase of the birth of a star, where the matter is being ordered, and then it gets to a stable phase, and eventually starts to become a sun. And then, as we know from physics, it'll start to order the solar system around it. So various planets will start to coalesce and all those sorts of things. And the question is that really all that's happening? Or is something ordering it? And there's a lot of, I don't know where the current debate about it is, but you'll find that the battle between science and religion happens to be about the two extremes of this argument. Is that science says it's completely driven by mechanics, and the creation end of the philosophy side or religious side would say no, it's completely designed inside God's being. And I think the middle ground is where you find that both of those need to work together. Both of those ideas need to actually come together and say we're both right. And let's find out how that works. So if we look at that, we can see that Rudolf Steiner gives a very particular emphasis about the evolution of stars. I'll give this to you to chew on, but you may or may not know that an Earth evolution like ours does actually have a direction. It's got a direction within it, and its direction is that the Earth eventually needs to become a sun. So when we, through our consciousness of what we carry upon the Earth, and allow it to affect the material or spiritualize the material of the Earth itself has to become a star, basically. That's going to go through a supernova to get there, so there is going to be a Big Bang at some point with us. But that's okay, because we will have evolved to be able to go with that. However, that's not the end of the story, because we at this point are evolving in a solar system. So at this point, a focal point of our evolution on the Earth is through what comes to us from the sun. So what comes from a sun? And we can look at it from the outside in or from the inside out, but when a sun evolves and fulfills itself, it becomes a zodiac. It becomes stars. So when a supernova happens, all the stardust, it becomes a formative circle for another, for the new sun that's come from the earth. And when a zodiac fulfills itself, so these are big cycles of time. We're not just talking, a few thousand years. We're talking big cycles of time here. When a zodiac, like the 12 signs of the zodiac and the current star forms around that, fulfill itself, that becomes a trinity. And now, what is a trinity? We sort of tend to not want to look at that word because it means Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But a trinity is a spiritual energy that carries a seed idea. It carries a seed idea. So when our solar system, held by the zodiac, that is the energy forces of the zodiac around us, fulfills itself, a new seed idea will be held. You could say, well, what will that new seed idea be? That'll come from our evolutionary cycle. Will there be a new seed idea, or will there not be? And that new seed idea becomes the guiding nous, the guiding consciousness in the new sun. So when all these suns are being born, we could ask ourselves, what are the guiding thoughts? We have to really broaden our consciousness here, because we tend to think, well, maybe you don't, but I certainly was brought up thinking that our Earth is a very special place, because it's the only place where there's conscious life in the whole of all the universes. And there's a big relativization in that question, saying, is that really so? But if you think of the possibility that every star that is born, that consciousness must, some form of consciousness, esoterically called a trinity, is seeding an idea into that process. That doesn't mean the outcome is inevitable. That's not the idea. That it's in the extreme of the fundamentalist idea of design only, that it's completely designed to the end and it's infallibly going to end up somewhere. That's not necessarily implicit. But an idea needs to work into the matter that is organizing itself. So a person like Stephen Hawking was asked a similar question, and he gave an answer and said, I believe that God created the world, Stephen Hawking, I believe that the gods or God created the world and then left us to work with it. Well, that's very much what Rudolf Steiner says too, by the way. That the gods have actually helped design nature, creation. They are imprints. They are imprints that come from the various consciousnesses that we call Sun, Moon, Jupiter, Southern Cross, Centaurus. There are many different emanations of energy, if we want to put it in scientific terms, frequencies that are coming in, consciousnesses that are here, that hold the lawfulness, the wisdom of our planet. And our bodies are built out of these consciousnesses. They shine into us. But they have withdrawn as well at the same time.
I have a question around the solstice and the galactic centre.
Yeah.
The solstice, I understand that it's a particular moment, 26,000 years, where this planet, and there's a portal in this moment in time where this planet is in the middle of the galactic centre.
Yeah.
And so it makes this solstice particularly potent. So I'm just sort of wondering how that connects up with this idea that of the both evolution and the seed and particular moments in time which should be powerful and significant.
Absolutely. So when we look at the way the whole solar system is moving, and I'll say something before I answer that. When we look at the models that we have over time held about how the whole solar system holds itself, we've gone from a sort of flat Earth geocentric kind of model, which is a static Earth and this circling of the planets around. And then that changed a few hundred years ago, where over a couple of thousand years people started to realize that it was heliocentric, and now we realize that that the sun is not static either. That the sun is moving as well, constantly, in this anti-clockwise movement with the whole galaxy. And therefore, rhythmically, planets come into alignment with certain stars and certain points of the galaxy. Our whole thing of astrology is built up on this. So the science, people might not want to call it a science, but astrology is a science, meaning a way of understanding things. Science doesn't mean physics, where we can just measure things. Science means a body of knowing. So astrology also actually works with these rhythms, and when we get to know better other planets, like the planet Chiron is coming into knowledge now, and we realize that that's got a 50-year rhythm before it returns to this point in our biography for healing. Neptune, Pluto, Uranus have all been added over the last couple of hundred years. The traditional 7 that we can see with our eyes were always there. But it's very interesting to look at history with this new knowledge and say, how did Chiron or these planets affect people before we knew about it? Can we measure that? And so as this whole swirling movement of the sun and the planets moves through the swirling of the galaxy, we come around in a circle, and eventually, 20 Platonic year, 26,000 years, the planets all align with the galactic center again, and that opens up a particular energy form. I'll just put a little plug for my book in here. In the book, I already talk about how the relationship between the sun, the earth, the zodiac signs, through just even the cycle of the year, are different. So when we say, for example, at the 21st of December, align ourselves, the earth, the sun, and at this point, the galactic center in Scorpio, there's a particular emanation of benevolence, of grace that comes to us through the sun. Yeah? Which isn't the same as the 21st of June, because we're standing then in Gemini, and we've got a whole different set of energies known as Orion, and all sorts of other energies that come to us through Taurus and Gemini. And these two, and that shifts the whole time. And this is the question. It's not a tick-tock movement. There's always a slight shortage of time, so that each year this position shifts. What determines that rhythm? This is the question. What determines that rhythm? So when the sun at the 21st of December is aligned, say, in a few thousand years from us now, it will be aligned with another point in the galaxy. That's just as powerful, but differently powerful. Yeah. So this particular alignment with what's known as the dark rift in the Mayan cosmology allows this galactic center to emanate a particular energy out of space. It's known as the road to Zabalba Bay, and it's a place where in Rudolf Steiner's pictures, and say, for example, in the Mysteries of Chartres, where the souls who are about to be reborn come back into our solar system. It's a doorway. So it's very pertinent that at Christmas time, the 21st of December, our solstice celebration aligns once again with where a birthing mystery takes place. So you can interpret that at all levels. There's a rebirthing of spirituality, there's a birthing of a new age, but it is also an alignment with the mysteries of the earth, how can I put it? Every so often we sort of feel in alignment with ourselves, if you know what I mean. We sort of wake up and we feel everything just clicks and it's all right. It's like a Rubiks Cube that's come together just for a moment, and then you move it on and it's all confused again. We could say at the moment the galaxy is in its base resonance because it's there. So there's a whole potency in our spiritual year at the moment that comes to us, facilitated through the sun. So I could do a little drawing that might help that. And this is one of the things that's Rudolf Steiner. Sorry, does that help answer that question a bit?
Yes, and I just was also been reflecting that this talk and this day is very close to that time.
Yeah, exactly.
Of the solstice and that alignment.
Yeah, I know we're on the other alignment at the moment.
Yes.
So we're sort of in opposition to it, which is also very powerful, of course. Yeah, so he says, "Let there be light." And then after a little while he says, let there be sun and moon and stars. So when did light come about? Was there... And people go, this is a crazy story because, light and sun must appear at the same time. So, chuck it out, let's look for something else. If it doesn't make sense, chuck it out. If it doesn't make sense, chuck it out. That's kind of the modern way of dealing with mythology and things, rather than trying to say, well, how does this make sense? How does this make sense? What does this word in the beginning, in the Hebrew, bereshit, bara, in the beginning, created Elohim, the heavens and the earth. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim vehet haaretz. In the beginning, God created, or the gods, Elohim is a plural, by the way, at that point. Yeah, so we have to almost say, in the beginning, the gods created. So we have to crack open our sense of monotheism. There's only one God. The gods created the heavens and the earth. What does that actually even mean? Yeah? What does that even mean? Without just saying, oh, well, we know what that means, because we tend to have pretexts in our souls about what biblical stories mean. We have ways of trying to create an inner logic of bringing science and our religious mythologies together. What is that for you in that sense? And if we go back to this point of saying, well, in the trying to bring science and mythology together, in that brooding of the waters of Genesis, or in, we could say, this time where the ripple effects of a supernova are trying to organize the stardust, something is shining in. Something is shining in. Consciousness is shining in. And in our particular solar system, which as we know is a tiny little dot in the middle of the universe, what is the thought that is shining in to this in the beginning, the Elohim created? There was a will, a design to be able to do that. And one way to try and imagine that is to try and live into what happens when you wake up out of a very meaningful dream. So when you wake up out of a very meaningful dream, there are kind of a couple of streams that come out of the dream for you. One is the content of the dream, the pictures, the thought, we could call it the thought content of the dream, that wants to actually come into manifestation. This is not every dream, of course, because we've got different kinds of dreams. So the jumbled dreams, but every so often we have a dream that's really meaningful. And when that dream comes across the threshold with us, we could say that there's an image within us that wants to come into manifestation. At the same time, there's a will that comes across the threshold of sleep that wants to make that happen. And Rubiks trying to ask us to imagine that's how these Elohim, the sun spirit, so the Elohim is the Hebrew word for the sun hierarchy. These are the beings that are in the sun, in the light, who are coming out of the dream of a previous Trinity, or previous cycle, that are in a Trinity, and have this idea that's coming to them like out of a dream of the past, that wants to manifest, and this will to order matter starts to flow through these beings, these sun beings. At this point, the sun isn't like the sun is at the moment, so we have to really stretch our minds to understand these things of the sun. And the idea, this is Rubiks, the idea is the human being. That's all it is, the human being. The idea, let us create the human being. And everything that starts to organize itself is tending towards what the fulfilled human being is. And if you could read the whole of evolution out of that, Darwin did in his own way, all the evolution stories, all the creation stories, all the mythology stories tend to explain the world as the human being is the catalytic creature in this solar system. That doesn't make the others less relevant. And we know the history that has made other creatures less relevant and how that's now cracking open again. So that's human thinking, that's political thinking, that's power thinking, that's misuse of the idea, yes. But it's now cracking open again where we are starting to feel another form is starting to break through. And where are these other forms starting to come from? That once again we are feeling that it is really important for us as human beings to take responsibility. I would promote that's coming from the sun. That is still coming through the sunlight, out of the great guidance of the consciousnesses that we call planets and stars, to help keep us on track, or on a track that is about the humane being the catalytic consciousness in the evolution of our planet towards becoming a sun itself. And therefore, we need to find the places on the earth where what comes to us from the light can be heard, can inspire us. And so therefore the sun mysteries become quite critical for us to be able to find those kind of things. Anyone want to ask a question or say anything about that?
Well,
Catherine?
would you care to give us an example or two of when you just said you believe that it's coming through and we are beginning to take responsibility or accept responsibility? And can you give an example off the top of your head of where you see that manifesting, like in everyday life or in the world?
Absolutely. I can give you millions of examples. People taking care for trees, people taking care for creatures who are uncared for. We can go down all sorts of, they might express themselves as conservation impulses, but I think that you'll find that there are many, many people who are finding, and I'm going to put it in other terms, who are finding a new consciousness in love. Our traditional form of love has been very anthrocentric, as in human-centered. So when we look at words we use for love, say for example in the Greek words for love, you have storge, which means the love of your family, the love of your blood, the love of your nation, the love of your football team, anywhere where you love the group. That's one form of love. The next level of love would be eros. So eros might be close to what I think is breaking open into a new level, but the eros is being able to love with the soul in the erotic sense. That often includes procreation and is often directed towards kind. Then you have philia, which is the sense of loving one's friend. And then we have agape, which is the highest form of love apparently, where you love with the divine love, and then we also include in that the love of God. And there's a lot of rewriting of Christian metaphor in this. I mean, part of the change in this picture is that Genesis 1, where just after God started to create everything, suddenly on the sixth day, the language changes. God says, firstly, not let there be light or let there be this. God suddenly says, let us create the human being. Let us, plural, suddenly, many gods. Let us create the human being in our image. In our image, let us create the human being. In God's image, the human being was created. That's Jewish chiastic poetry. You say something frontwards, you say it backwards, and then you add a third verse to add information. The added information is the human being is created male and female alike. So men and women image God equally. Wow, let's tell 2,000 years of Christianity and Western civilization that. Yeah? Like, how long did it take us to work that out? That the creation story that we have based Western colonialism on actually means all creatures image God equally. That's the kind of big revolution in Christian theology at the moment. But what happens with that is that suddenly you start to see all sorts of changes in paradigms. So one of the paradigms that shifts with that is we go to Genesis 2, where, so go back to Genesis 1, God then says, go out and have dominion over the world. Let's chuck that out, because that was a particular group of priests in Jerusalem who wrote that. But if you go to Genesis 2, it actually says human beings go and care and tend for creation. Now imagine if the colonialists 400 or 500 years ago have come with a paradigm that actually our commission as human beings is to tend and care for each other and not dominate and subdue. We would have had a different sense of colonial application to indigenous people. We would have had a completely feminist society being built out of that. But we chose to go with dominate and subdue. We chose to go with that version rather than the more egalitarian story of the second book of Genesis. And now, Christian theology is saying we actually have this commission. We need to learn that our commission is to care and tend for the whole of creation. This means, as out for, the land has rights. If a farmer doesn't let the land lie fallow, he should be fined for abusing the land. If we let Monsanto genetically modify life, they should be fined for abuse of life. This is emerging in people. Countries, I don't know how true it is, but apparently some countries have banned Monsanto. Monsanto's taking them to the High Court, etc. So there is a battlefield in this change of life. This change of love. They are connected because there's a new word. It's not a new word, but I came across this. There's a new form of love being expressed, which is called biophilia, which means the love of life. You could say that's eros, but it's not. It's the love of life. So if I look at a puppy in mud drowning and I see its face, I love it. Even if I just see a new. So when I look at a flower, I love it. There's a love of life in all of creation that, in a way, I don't know if it's. I think indigenous people probably love it very strongly, but certainly in our Western context, we've suppressed this love of life. We've used Mother Nature as a stage for our own benefit, as a resource. And that is being broken out from within. So I see a lot of initiatives in the world from, talking to trees, to holding blessings for rocks and water and air, to go alongside, or to even say that it's a consciousness that we are placing within the conservation initiative.
So would you say that is maybe an unconscious, a mission on the part of human beings that they are unconsciously recognising the nature spirits, the spirits and the gods behind?
Who are the they?
Human beings.
I don't even know if it's unconscious anymore. I think initially it's unconscious. I think initially people going, we need another paradigm here. So we turn to the indigenous people, we turn to esoteric spirituality and say, oh my goodness, everything has a being behind it. And so first it's a kind of like a knowledge a priori. I know there's an elemental being in that tree, now I'll go and find it. But once you've found it, it's no longer theoretical, it's no longer unconscious. And people are having profound experiences in taking up custodianship of elements. I was watching a video the other day. This woman, she married the ocean because she loves it so much. Now you might go, that is really strange. But
it's put down to madness by other mainstream.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I saw a woman, she married a tree, and you go, really? But then you go, yeah, really? People are really starting to experience the love that takes us beyond species, this love of life. And I think it's an advanced form of love.
You're saying it's higher than agape.
Sorry?
You're saying it's higher than agape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say it's a cracking open of that. I'm not sure if it's higher than agape, but it certainly is. People are feeling the grief and the suffering of their beloved planet. Now, it could be an expression of agape because, of course, God is in everything. Our world is not outside the divine world. And I think this is part of the sun mysteries, is that it was Turner. There's this wonderful film that's just come out about Turner, but on his deathbed he said, the sun is God. You just take that in, the sun is God. And he's not wrong, he's absolutely right, that through the sun, everything that we know about God, whichever form you want to put it in, is carried in our knowledge of how the sun works. And therefore the sun mystery, the places where people have come together to develop how we utilize the sun, is quite critical. It's actually quite critical to our well-being as human beings, and to see that love itself is evolving. If, for example, we take the gospel reading that we had, I hope you had it. Did you do the God is love one this week? Yeah. So the reading at the altar this week is that God is love, and it literally says, love was given to us when Christ came to earth. Now, if we take that as a science, that the Bible actually knows what it's talking about somewhere, you have to go, well, what did we do before Christ came? Didn't we love each other? Well, we did, but we loved ourselves. We loved each other because we were blood relatives. We loved each other because we had arranged marriages. We married within a tribe. It's not that long ago that we would never marry someone from another nation. That only came about not that long ago. We sort of think we're so advanced, but it's only a few thousand years ago that we would actually start this cross-cultural opening up of the bloodstream to be able to allow individual love. And that individual love is now cracking open again. It's evolving. Love is constantly evolving. So wherever I see these things, I think when you say what are the everyday examples, I think those are the kind of things that we do, that I would bring. And I do think that the media is a very important part of this. I know we don't like the media, but the media is the spear that keeps shoving pain in your heart. Yeah, that's what's cracking us open, because we see 200 girls being, kidnapped in Africa, and they can't find them 2 hours after they're gone. And you go, how do you hold that? And then they come back, and you see how they've come back, and you go, the sadness, the grief, and that's still human beings, but the disasters of animals. If you take, for example, this would be a very interesting one about the when they shot the gorilla in America. Why did they shoot the gorilla? Why didn't they shoot the boy? Sorry, I know that's a very controversial question, but we preference human life over animal life. This was an endangered species. Human beings aren't endangered. Sorry, we are out of control. Why not protect the gorilla? I mean, if they go to court about this, it'll be very interesting to see what arguments come. I mean, I know why they did it. I'm not trying to say they shouldn't have done it, but if you look at this biophilia, why is the life of the boy more important than the life of an extinct gorilla? If you're loving all of God's creation out of being equally imaging the creative thought, because gorillas, plants, stones eventually need to become humanized. They are on an evolutionary process themselves. We can't think that animals, trees, stones are not evolving. This cracks it open for me. I said that provocatively, so I'm not suggesting, I don't want to go down, burn to the stake for things. It's an interesting jeopardy, because there are too many human beings. It's a real crisis for a lot of people. And from a non-religious point of view, it's an equation. We are a virus, and you can kill viruses, etc., etc. So this will, I think, will be the ethical debate forum in the coming century about how do we maintain this planet as an environment where all of us can evolve together. I mean, this is the call of the indigenous people. They kept the balance where no one species, including human species, could outbalance the other. And they had what we would call, barbaric practices. But if a person was born who couldn't sustain life, they were put in the river at birth. That was compassion, but it's with a completely different consciousness. So I think there's a lot of interesting debate coming up about how we're going to love life in a different way than preferencing an anthropocentric preference. I think it's cracking open. I don't know where it's going to go, but I think it's going to be awesome and frightening at the same time. Yeah.
Martin, it's not unknown to all the indigenous cultures, to the older, more ancient cultures, and you said that really in the flyer, you and Daryl put those words together, that with Mayan culture, with Egyptian culture, and other groups of people, I mean, we could list off a lot, and you could do that better than I could, have always lived with this awareness of the balance.
Yeah.
So it's not new. And
no, it's not new at all.
Many of us here have been seeded with, I don't know, or somehow have an appreciation of it, and there are many people in Western cultures, in our cultures, and we're various cultures here among us. So it's not So that's good, that's evolving, but the ancients have always
Yeah,
held and known this, so in some
Yeah.
ways it has always been there.
absolutely.
So,
But it's gone through a bit of a death process, especially in the Western culture, and it's being reborn out of a different consciousness. And this is one of the things. Sorry, yeah.
Well, I just wanted to add with Akhenaten, so the god king Akhenaten in Egypt knew about the sun and wanted to worship, but he used some dew, and he used that sort of colonial conquering approach, and he abused people to get there. And where does that land lie? Under the sand. It didn't persist. So the pantheon of gods, were more prevalent. He knew something. He went about it the wrong way. That particular.
Did he, or is that a Western overlay?
Maybe. Because there's some interesting stuff done from outer space, looking at what lays under the sand.
Oh, absolutely.
About that whole
Absolutely.
aspect of Egypt.
But there's so many things that we don't know about the Egyptian culture at the moment that are just now being rediscovered.
This is true.
People
By that
have
technology.
a different theory about
Exactly.
them not being slaves, but such believing culture that everything they do had a purpose that was higher than that life. So from that to also making sure that all of the pyramids align with the stars in representing that 26,000 year cycle as well.
Yeah.
So,
And there's that boy in America who mapped a Mayan city. I don't know if you saw that. Over a few years, he sort of mapped all the Mayan cities and said there's something missing here because all the others are on this map and there isn't anything here. And NASA found that there was actually a structure there. So there's definitely stuff there. But thank you for pointing that out, because we're going to break for tea in a moment. I want to go into that, how the sun mysteries have changed over time. Because Akhenaten, what he did is known as the monotheistic heresy of the time, and that's why they kicked him out. However, he was also observing a change in the nature of the sun. And this is what's important for us to realize, is that we tend to look back at history and think everything has always worked like it works now. But it doesn't. As we evolve, and Rudolf Steiner is very clear to us that we need to understand how the very nature of the sun has also changed. And Akhenaten at that time was one who saw that. He tried to express that and what that change was. And then what happened, 1,500 years after that, what happened to the Egyptian culture in the Osiris mysteries, how they developed through time, show that people became aware how what was streaming to us through the sun actually changes. And I think this is part of what I'd like to do. So yes, Akhenaten went about it in a particular way that wasn't necessarily correct, but there was something important for us to look at. What was he actually trying to point to in that change?
And some of my thoughts about him come from a Western presented
Absolutely,
piece of work.
Yeah.
So thank you for pointing
Yeah. We do need to go back in history and look
sources.
go back to what people themselves said about themselves. And there is stuff there. As you say, the stuff that's coming out of Egypt at the moment is phenomenal. In the digs and the archaeological finds and the understanding of the hieroglyphs is quite phenomenal. So I suppose at this point I would just like to repeat that we need to, or we challenge to think of consciousness epitomized in mythological pictures as star pictures, or dark space pictures in space, in the movement and the rhythms of the planets, come to us through the sun. And they are mediated by other consciousnesses into the earth, and everything on the earth is within the sun's being. So all forms, all matter is spiritual by nature, and it is consciousness that is organizing it, and that there is a journey within this evolutionary process of matter that Rudolf Steiner calls the human being. And we need to grapple with that, because it's not very popular being human at the moment. If we look at what we've done with our great commission, we're on an edge of and what can we turn to help ourselves? And I think it's a turning to the sun mysteries. But by the end of the day, hopefully we'll also have got to see how the sun mysteries are different now to how they have been in the past. So even Akhenaten, even 2,000 years ago, the sun itself has changed yet again, the sun mystery within us. And where do we go to find that? I'd like to sort of continue and go maybe into more historical detail about that after a cup of tea. Okay?
Thank you.